He began gathering materials from the surrounding area pine resin, certain barks and leaves known for their pungent smoke when burned, stones of particular shapes used in traditional Apache diversionary tactics. The wolves watched with evident interest as he prepared these simple but effective tools. When finished, he divided them into small bundles that could be easily carried. "For your strongest runners," he explained, indicating several younger wolves. "Placed properly, these will create confusion without causing harm." As preparations concluded, the chief added a final symbol to the map, a perfect circle, containing a paw print and a human handprint side by side. "The old alliance is renewed tonight," he said solemnly. The alpha wolf stepped forward and placed its actual paw directly atop the drawn print, sealing their pact as darkness enveloped the mountains completely. Lieutenant Hayes woke to the unsettling sensation of being watched. Dawn had barely begun to lighten the eastern sky as he emerged from his tent, Winchester rifle in hand. The camp was quiet except for the stamp of restless horses and the soft snores of exhausted men. "Sergeant Collins," he called softly to the night watchman. "Report." The sergeant approached, fatigue evident in his posture. "Quiet night, sir." "Almost too quiet. No normal forest sounds for the last hour." Hayes frowned. "Wake the men. I want to move out in 20 minutes. As the camp stirred to life, Two Feathers stood apart, studying the surrounding forest with evident unease. The scout had slept poorly, troubled by dreams filled with wolf songs and childhood warnings about trespassing in sacred places. "Your face tells me you have concerns," Hayes said. Approaching the Apache with coffee in hand, Two Feathers accepted the tin cup gratefully. "This place not good, Lieutenant. Old stories say—" "Spare me the superstitions," Hayes interrupted. "I need facts. How far to the cave where you believe the old man is hiding?" 2 hours' ride through narrow canyon, the scout replied reluctantly. But nothing. We'll have him in custody by midday and be headed back to the fort by afternoon." Hayes checked his sidearm. "Your people will learn that no one is beyond the government's reach." 20 minutes later, the patrol moved out in single file, horses picking their way carefully along the snow-covered trail. Two Feathers led, followed by Hayes, with the rest of the soldiers strung out behind. They had traveled less than a mile when the scout suddenly raised his hand in warning. "Tracks," he announced, pointing to disturbances in the snow. "Wolf tracks. Many wolves." Hayes dismounted to examine the sign. Even to his less experienced eye, the number of prints was unusual, a large pack moving with purpose rather than the random patterns of hunting. More disturbing was their recency. These tracks had been made within the hour. "Keep moving," he ordered, remounting. "Wolves won't bother armed men." They continued deeper into the canyon, the walls rising steadily on either side. The morning remained unnaturally quiet. No birds called, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. Every man felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking their progress. Feathers stopped again where the canyon narrowed significantly. "Not good place for horses," he warned. "Better to go on foot from here." Hayes considered, then nodded. Collins detailed 2 men to stay with the horses, everyone else rifles ready. As they prepared to continue on foot, Private Jenkins pointed toward the ridgeline. "Sir, movement up there." Hayes raised his field glasses. Against the snow, dark shapes moved with fluid coordination, at least 5 wolves pacing them from above. "Just curious predators," he said with more confidence then. He felt, maintained formation. They had advanced perhaps 50 yards when the first howl echoed through the canyon along. Eerie call unlike typical wolf vocalizations. It was answered immediately from the opposite ridge, then from somewhere ahead, and finally from behind. "We're surrounded," Collins muttered. Two Feathers touched a protective amulet beneath his shirt. "Not normal wolves," he insisted. "Spirit wolves. the kind old stories worn about. Before Hayes could dismiss this claim, a distinctive series of barks erupted from the ridgeline, sharp, commanding sounds that could almost be mistaken for signals. Immediately, 3 wolves appeared directly in their path, massive creatures with winter-thick coats and unnerving focus. "Fire a warning shot," Hayes ordered, raising his own rifle. The simultaneous crack of several firearms shattered the morning stillness, the reports echoing and amplifying between the canyon walls. The wolves vanished instantly, not in panic, but with deliberate, coordinated withdrawal. The gunshots triggered something else. From high above came a deep rumbling sound that every mountain soldier recognized with dread. "Avalanche!" Collins shouted, "Take cover!" The men scattered, pressing themselves against the canyon walls as snow began to slide from the upper slopes. It wasn't a full avalanche, just enough loosened snow to cascade down in a frightening display of nature's power. When it settled, their original path was blocked, but miraculously, no one was injured. "That was no coincidence," Hayes said grimly, brushing snow from his uniform. "Those shots were placed to trigger that slide." "Impossible," Collins objected. "Wolves can't." "Not the wolves," Hayes interrupted. "The old Apache. He's using them somehow, working with them." He turned to 2 feathers. "Is there another way around?" The scout nodded reluctantly. "Longer path, through exposed clearing." "Then, that's our route." But first, Hayes reached into his saddlebag and removed a brass compass in a polished wooden case, a prized possession given to him upon graduation from West Point. He studied it briefly, getting his bearings in the confusing canyon system, then tucked it into his pocket dot as they regrouped to continue. Private Hicks noticed something. "Sir, Jenkins and Williams are missing." A quick count confirmed 2 soldiers had become separated during the confusion. Hayes cursed under his breath. Collins signaled them with the bugle. 3 clear notes rang out, met with silence. From high, on the ridge came another wolf howl, this one sounding unnervingly like laughter. Dusk descended upon a makeshift camp in a small clearing, where Lieutenant Hayes had ordered his remaining men to establish a defensive position. The day's march had yielded no sign of the missing soldiers, only fleeting glimpses of wolves shadowing their every move. Each attempt to approach the cave had been thwarted by fallen trees, minor rock slides, or the sudden appearance of wolves blocking their path. "Build the fire larger," Hayes commanded, his voice betraying the strain of repeated setbacks. "I want clear visibility in all directions." "Sir," Sergeant Collins approached cautiously, "using that much firewood will leave us nothing for morning." "And it makes us a clear target." "Target for what, Sergeant? Wolves? Or are you starting to believe our scouts' ghost stories too?" Hayes extracted a silver flask from his inner pocket and took a long swallow before continuing. "The old Apache is playing games, trying to unnerve us. I won't give him the satisfaction." The soldiers worked silently, expanding the fire until flames leapt 6 feet high, casting writhing shadows against the canyon walls. Beyond the circle of firelight, darkness pressed in a living darkness punctuated by occasional gleams of reflected light as wolf eyes caught the glow. 2. Feathers sat apart from the soldiers, his back pressed against a boulder, rifle across his knees. Unlike the white men who focused outward, searching for physical threats, the Apache scout's attention was turned inward. He was remembering stories told by grandmothers, warnings passed through generations, sacred knowledge about the wolf people and their ancient pact with certain Apache bands. "They say you understand our speech," he whispered in his native tongue, addressing the darkness. "They say you remember when our peoples hunted together before the separation. If this is true, know that I did not mean to betray grandfather. Nashye, I only sought to protect our people in my own way." From the darkness came a soft whine, not threatening, but contemplative. As though considering his words, Hayes approached, interrupting the scouts' communion. "Stop that muttering and report. What are they doing out there?" Two feathers listened to the distant howls, echoing from multiple directions. They signaled to each other. They ... He hesitated, uncertain how to explain concepts the white man would. "Dismiss. They plan. Nonsense. They're just animals." Hayes took another pull from his flask. "And the old man is just a superstitious relic, using coincidence and fear to appear powerful." "You are wrong, Lieutenant," Two Feathers said quietly. "Grandfather Níłch'į carries old medicine, old knowledge. The wolf pack moves with purpose I have never seen before. We should withdraw, report what we've found." Hayes laughed harshly. "Withdraw? And tell Captain Williams what? That we were defeated by an old man and some wolves? That we lost 2 men? To shadows and howling?" He shook his head firmly. "We continue at first light. This childish resistance ends tomorrow." Throughout the night, the wolves maintained their vigil, their calls creating an unnerving impression of encirclement. The pattern of howls seemed deliberately structured. 3 wolves would call from one direction, then another group from the opposite side, never revealing their full numbers, but suggesting a force larger than any natural pack. Sleep proved elusive for most of the men. Private Cooper finally voiced what many were thinking. "It's like they're taking shifts, sir. Like a military picket line." "That's exactly what the old Apache wants you to think," Hayes snapped. After a moment, he caught the faint scent of wood smoke, tobacco different from his own, and the distinctive oil used by cavalry to clean their rifles. "Men approach," he said grimly. "Soldiers, and at least 1 Apache scout." The alpha wolf stared intently at him and deliberately scraped a paw through the snow, exposing the earth beneath. With precise movements, it drew a line in the dirt, and parallel lines intersecting the first. "They follow my trail," Níłch'į interpreted, recognizing the simple map. "And they come from the direction of my people." Concern tightened his weathered features. "This is no random patrol. They hunt specifically for me." The black wolf approached, carrying something in its mouth. It dropped the object at the chief's feet, a brass button from a cavalry uniform, apparently torn from a coat during reconnaissance. "You have encountered them already," Níłch'į said, examining the button. "Close enough to take this." The alpha wolf circled restlessly, its injury seemingly forgotten in the face of immediate threat. Its golden eyes moved meaningfully between the chief, the retreating scouts, and the cave. Understanding dawned. "You offer protection," Níłch'į said in wonder. "Your pack will watch the soldiers while we plan." The black wolf and the remaining scouts arranged themselves in a protective perimeter around the cave entrance. Meanwhile, the alpha nudged the chief back toward the shelter, clearly indicating they should retreat inside in the cave. Níłch'ĩ added fuel to the fire, more for light than warmth. The alpha wolf sat opposite him, their eyes level across the flames. In this moment of shared purpose, the barrier between their species seemed thinnest. "Lieutenant Hayes has finally found his excuse to move against me," the chief mused aloud. "He believes I incite resistance among our young men by teaching the old ways." The wolf's ears pricked forward, listening with evident comprehension. "If he arrests or kills me, the people lose heart," Níłch'į continued. "If I fight and shed blood, he gains justification to move against the entire tribe." He sighed heavily. "It is a trap with no good escape." The alpha tilted its head, then deliberately limped in a circle before standing straight and strong. "Yes," the chief nodded slowly. "Sometimes what appears to be weakness becomes strength. And what seems like a trap," his eyes brightened with sudden insight, ... can become a trap for the trapper himself. The wolf's teeth showed briefly in what could almost be interpreted as a smile. Outside, a low howl rose from one of the scouts, a warning that their visitors were drawing closer. Lieutenant. Marshal Hayes lowered his field glasses and frowned at the terrain ahead. 3 days of tracking the old Apache through winter mountains had left his 12-man patrol cold, tired, and increasingly surly. Only his iron discipline and promise of extra rations kept complaints to a minimum. "He's holed up somewhere ahead," Hayes informed his sergeant, a weathered veteran named Collins. No man, especially not one his age, moves through a storm like the one that hit last night. "Maybe he froze to death and saved us the trouble," Collins suggested, stomping his feet against the cold. Hayes shook his head. "Not that old fox. He's survived worse than this." He turned to the Apache scout, who maintained a careful distance from the soldiers. 2 feathers, front and center. The scout approached reluctantly. Unlike the soldiers in their heavy blue coats, 2 feathers wore a mixture of traditional Apache garments and cast-off cavalry clothing. A single feather adorned his hat, not the 2 that had given him his name among the whites. The second had been broken years ago in the same confrontation that had left a jagged scar across his left cheek. "The old man's trail," Hayes demanded. "Where does it lead?" 2 feathers scanned the snow-covered slopes with eyes trained since childhood to read the land. "He went north into the canyon lands. Bad place to follow." "Bad for you, perhaps," Hayes said dismissively. "We have rifles and 12 men." 2 feathers met the lieutenant's gaze evenly. "Grandfather Níłch'ĩ knows these mountains better than any man living. If he goes to canyon lands in winter, he has purpose." Hayes snorted. "Grandfather? Is that what you call the old troublemaker? Remember which side feeds you, scout." A flash of something pride, perhaps, or shame crossed 2 feathers' face before vanishing behind careful neutrality. "I track 4. You because our people must eat. But the old chief deserves respect. He fought with Geronimo before you had whiskers." The lieutenant fingered the brass buttons on his coat, one conspicuously missing after an encounter with ... something during the previous night's watch. "Your respected elder is inciting the young men on the reservation to resist government education. 3 boys ran away from the school last month, spouting the same nonsense about old ways that he preaches." "Teaching our stories is not crime," 2 feathers said quietly. "Interfering with the civilization of savages is," Hayes countered sharply. He removed a folded paper from his coat pocket, officially stamped and sealed. "I have orders to bring him in for questioning. Alive, preferably, but the paper doesn't specify condition." 2 feathers stiffened. "You said nothing of killing when you hired me to track." "And I've said nothing of it now," Hayes replied coolly. "But mountains are dangerous. Accidents happen." He gestured toward the distant canyon. "Now earn your rations." Where would he shelter? The scout hesitated, internal conflict evident in his posture. Finally, he pointed toward a northeasterly ridge. "There is cave system, used by our people since ancient times. Sacred place." Hayes smiled thinly. "Sacred to you, perhaps. To me, it's terrain." He turned to Sergeant Collins. "Prepare the men to move out. I want to reach this cave by midday." As the sergeant issued orders, 2 feathers knelt, ostensibly, adjusting his footwear while actually studying the snow more carefully. What he saw troubled him deeply. Mingled with the chief's trail were wolf tracks many wolves, moving with purpose rather than the random patterns of hunting. And something else, a single set of prints larger than any wolf he had ever encountered, with distinctive markings that stirred childhood memories of stories told around winter fires. Stories of the spirit wolf, the messenger between worlds who would return when the Apache needed guidance most. "Problem, scout?" Hayes called, noting his prolonged examination. 2 feathers rose slowly. "Wolves follow same trail?" "Many wolves." "They." Lieutenant shrugged. "Probably trailing the old man hoping he'll lead them to food." Load your rifle like everyone else if you're scared. Not hunting pattern, Two Feathers insisted. Something not right about these wolves. Hayes laughed sharply. First superstitious nonsense from the old man, now from you. Perhaps all you people need more schooling. He adjusted his holster. Wolves are just wolves' vermin with teeth. They'll scatter at the first gunshot. As the patrol prepared to move out, Two Feathers touched the medicine pouch hidden beneath his shirt. In it lay a small carved wolf his grandfather had given him, the grandfather who had been Níłch'į's cousin and had spoken often of the old chief's spiritual connection to the ancient powers. "Lieutenant," he said suddenly, "wolves gather like this only when they have purpose. In old stories, enough." Hayes cut him off. "I don't pay you for stories. I pay you to track. Do your job or go hungry back at the reservation." The bugler sounded advance, the notes bright and incongruous in the wilderness silence. As the patrol moved forward, Two Feathers fell into position. At the rear, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding forest. Unlike the soldiers who watched only for human threats, he searched for yellow eyes among the trees, for shadows moving with unnatural coordination. He had chosen the white man's side years ago after a bitter dispute with Níłch'ĩ over the future of their people. Now, surrounded by signs he couldn't ignore, Two Feathers wondered if he had chosen wrongly, and if reconciliation might come too late. Inside the cave, Chief Níłch'ĩ listened intently as the alpha wolf growled softly, its ears swiveling toward the canyon entrance. The animal's body language conveyed information as clearly as spoken words. The soldiers were closer than expected, moving with purpose despite difficult terrain. They know where to look, the chief concluded. Someone guides them who knows our ways. The wolf's gaze was steady, intelligent, waiting for the human to reach the inevitable conclusion. Two Feathers, Níłch'ĩ said softly, the name carrying the weight of old wounds. My sister's son, who chose the white man's path. A commotion outside interrupted his thoughts. The black wolf appeared at the cave entrance, accompanied by a young Apache, brave barely into manhood. The youth's eyes widened at the sight of wolves, moving with such evident purpose around the chief's shelter. "Grandfather," the young man exclaimed, using the term of respect. "The people sent me to find you." Soldiers came to the reservation too. Days passed, many soldiers with many guns. Níłch'ĩ gestured for the youth to sit. "I am known to you? I am Keem, son of Hanska. You blessed me at my naming ceremony." The young man couldn't keep his eyes from the alpha wolf that sat calmly at the chief's side. "The stories are true, then? About the wolf spirits? Focus, young one. Tell me of these soldiers." Keem tore his gaze from the wolf. "They came with papers from the Indian agent. They search all lodges, take ceremonial items, arrest 3 elders. Who resisted? They say?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Speak freely, Níłch'ĩ," he encouraged. "They say you spread dangerous ideas, that you teach rebellion against the government. The agent claims you encouraged young men to leave the school, to reject white man's knowledge." The chief's weathered face remained impassive, though his eyes hardened. "I teach our ways alongside theirs. Knowledge is not the enemy, forgetting is. There is more," Keem continued. "While Lieutenant Hayes leads this small party to find you, Captain Williams prepares a larger force. If Hayes fails to return in 4 days, Williams will assume hostility and move against our entire settlement." Níłch'ĩ absorbed this information with the practiced calm of a leader accustomed to crisis. "How many ride with Hayes?" 12. Soldiers plus 2 Feathers as scout. And Williams commands? 40 mounted soldiers with wagon guns. The chief exchanged a look with the alpha wolf, whose intelligent eyes reflected understanding of their worsening situation. "So I face a choice with no good path. Submit to Hayes and abandon our people to William's civilization, or resist and give them excuse for greater violence. The alpha wolf rose suddenly, limping to the cave entrance. It issued a complex series of barks and growls. Within moments, 4 younger wolves appeared, arranging themselves in an attentive semicircle. Níłch'į watched as the alpha communicated with the newcomers through an intricate combination of sounds, postures, and expressions. The exchange concluded with the 4 younger wolves departing at a run, splitting into pairs heading in different directions. "They go to watch the approaches," the chief interpreted for Kem's benefit, "and perhaps to prepare." The young brave stared in astonishment. "You speak with wolves?" "Not as I speak with you," Níłch'į replied. "But understanding returns, like remembering a language heard in childhood." He turned his attention back to the urgent matter at hand. "You took great risk coming here, Kim. The people need you to return with my words." From his medicine pouch, the chief extracted a single eagle feather, one of his most sacred possessions, earned decades ago during a vision quest. With his hunting knife, he made a small, precise cut near the base, then bound the wound with a thread of sinew dyed red with ochre. "This carries my authority," he explained, handing the feather to Kim. "Show it to Tazunk. Tell him the time has come to lead the people to the hidden valley, as we discussed. They must leave tonight, under darkness, taking only what they can carry easily." "Leave the reservation?" Kim asked, clearly shocked. "The soldiers will pursue." "Not if their attention remains here," the chief said grimly. "Hayes hunts me with determination that blinds him. Williams awaits Hayes' signal. Between them, a window opens for our people's escape." The alpha wolf had returned to Níłch'į's side, its golden eyes fixed on the feather message with evident understanding. It nudged the chief's hand, then looked meaningfully at Kim. "Yes," Níłch'ĩ agreed with the unspoken suggestion. "Tell Tazunk also to watch for the wolves. They will guide where human eyes might miss the trail." Kim clutched the feather reverently. "And you, grandfather? Will you join us in the hidden valley?" The old chief exchanged another look with the Volf. "My path leads elsewhere for now. I must ensure Hayes remains occupied until our people are safely away." "You place yourself as bait in a trap," Kim protested. A rare smile crossed Níłch'į's weathered features. "Sometimes the best way to survive a trap is to trigger it when you choose, not when the trapper intends." He gestured toward the assembled wolves. "And I do not stand alone." Understanding the gravity of the moment, he knelt before the chief, head bowed in respect. Níłch'ĩ placed his hands on the young man's shoulders, murmuring a traditional blessing in their native tongue. Then, with unexpected gentleness, the alpha wolf approached and briefly touched its nose to Kem's forehead, a gesture that caused the young man to inhale sharply. "He offers protection for your journey home, Níłch'ĩ," he translated. "2 of his pack will shadow your path to ensure safe passage." Indeed, as Kim prepared to depart, 2 sleek gray wolves materialized at the cave entrance, their posture alert but non-threatening. The young brave's expression mingled fear and wonder as he realized these formidable predators would be his companions. "Trust them as you would trust our best warriors," the chief advised. "They see and hear what humans cannot. If they alert you to danger, heed them without question." Kim nodded, gathering his courage. "I will carry your message, grandfather." But he hesitated. The stories say when the spirit wolf returns, great change comes to the people. Is this that time? Níłch'ĩ studied the alpha wolf beside him, noting again the unusual markings that set it apart from ordinary wolves. "The old ways are not dead, only sleeping," he replied. "Perhaps it is time for awakening." With a final respectful nod, Kim departed, the 2 wolves flanking him at a discreet distance. Níłch'ĩ watched until they disappeared among the trees. carrying hope for his people's survival into the gathering afternoon dot inside the cave. The chief turned to the alpha wolf. "Now we prepare our own message for Lieutenant Hayes," he said with grim determination. "One written in signs he cannot ignore, but also cannot use against our people." The wolf's golden eyes gleamed with what could only be described as anticipation as twilight approached. Níłch'į knelt outside the cave, clearing a patch of snow to expose the dark earth beneath. With a charred stick from the fire, he began to draw a detailed map of the surrounding terrain, the canyon's twisting pathways, the locations of steeper climbs, the places where snow would have drifted deepest. The alpha wolf watched intently, occasionally sniffing at particular markings, as though committing them to memory. Around them, the pack had gathered 17 wolves now visible, with others presumably still patrolling the perimeter. "Hayes will make camp soon," the chief explained, speaking as naturally as he would to a human companion. Night travel in these mountains would risk his men and horses, but by first light they will reach this valley. He indicated a location roughly 2 miles from their current position. Two Feathers knows of this cave. He will lead them here. The wolf tilted its head, golden eyes fixed on the rudimentary map. Then, with deliberate movement, it placed a paw on the drawing, leaving a perfect print in a location the chief hadn't yet marked. Níłch'į studied the impression with surprise. Yes, the narrow passage there. A good place for watching unseen. He added additional markings to indicate the spot. "You know these canyons well." The alpha made a soft sound, then limped in a deliberate circle around the map, occasionally pausing to look meaningfully at specific points. The chief nodded, understanding dawning. "You suggest we divide your pack, position them at these vantage points." He modified the map accordingly. "We create a net rather than a spear." Working together with an efficiency that belied their different species, man and wolf refined the strategy. The chief used traditional Apache symbols to indicate positions, timing signals. The wolf contributed its knowledge of the pack's capabilities and the terrain's hidden aspects. "We must balance carefully," Níłch'į murmured. "Hayes must be convinced to abandon his mission, yet without bloodshed that would justify William's larger attack." The black wolf that served as the alpha's lieutenant approached, carrying something in its mouth. It dropped a small branch. The chief's feet a pine bough with needles intact. "Yes," Níłch'į agreed, adding the branch to the map. "The heavy snow on the upper slopes. With proper disturbance, it could slide without burying the men. A warning, not a weapon." The alpha wolf looked toward the darkening sky, then back to the chief, making a huffing sound. "Tonight," Níłch'ĩ confirmed. "We prepare tonight, act at dawn." He turned to address the assembled pack, raising his voice just enough to carry. "I ask your help not for myself alone, but for my people. Like yours, we have been driven from our hunting grounds, forced to live by others' rules. Together, perhaps we find a new path." The wolves' attentive stillness conveyed their understanding, more effectively than words could have done. One by one, they approached the map, sniffing the markings, committing the plan to memory in their own way. The chief pointed to different groups of wolves, then to their assigned positions on the map. Each group responded with subtle shifts in posture, acknowledging their role. The level of comprehension they displayed would have astounded anyone who viewed wolves as mere animals as darkness fell completely. Níłch'ĩ used small stones to create physical markers on the map 5 locations where the wolves would position themselves, 2 potential avalanche triggers, 3 escape routes if things went wrong. The alpha wolf suddenly stiffened, ears pivoting toward the south. Within moments, 2 scout wolves materialized from the darkness, moving directly to their leader. A complex exchange of soft whines and body language followed. "They've found Hayes' camp," the chief interpreted, watching closely. 3 miles distant, They post guards, but set only a small fire. They fear detection. He smiled grimly. Two Feathers has warned them, but Hayes dismisses his concerns. The Alpha made a sound remarkably like a huff of derision, then deliberately placed its paw print directly over the cave location on the map their current position. Yes, Níłch'į agreed. Hayes believes he hunts us, but we set the true trap. This is psychological warfare, nothing more. But his fingers drummed nervously on his flask as he scanned the darkness dot near midnight. Two Feathers suddenly stiffened. Someone comes. The men raised their rifles as a figure emerged from the shadows, not the expected Apache elder, but Private Jenkins, one of the missing soldiers. He stumbled into the firelight, wide-eyed and disheveled. "Report, Private," Hayes demanded after ensuring the man was uninjured. "Wolves, sir," Jenkins stammered. "They herded us like cattle. Whenever we tried to return to the group, they would appear, forcing us along different paths. Never attacked, just directed us. Williams is still out there. We got separated." When he stopped, seeming to struggle with his next words. "When what, soldier?" Hayes pressed. "When we saw the old Indian, sir. He was standing on a ridge with the biggest wolf I've ever seen beside him, like they were ... conferring. Williams panicked, fired a shot, missed, then the wolves separated us." Hayes' expression hardened. "Did the Apache threaten you directly? Any hostile action I can document?" Jenkins shook his head. "No, sir. He just watched us. But the wolves, sir, they're not right. They move like they understand words, like they're following orders." Two Feathers nodded solemnly. "The ancient alliance awakens. Wolf Nation remembers the old pact with my people." "Enough!" Hayes erupted. "I won't have this superstitious drivel undermining morale." He turned to Sergeant Collins. "Double the watch. Shoot any wolf that approaches within 50 yards. At dawn, we find Williams and complete our mission." As Hayes stalked back to his tent, Two Feathers stared into the darkness where dozens of eyes now reflected the firelight, their pattern forming an unbroken circle around the camp. "You do not understand what you face, Lieutenant," he murmured. "This is not war against one old man. This is awakening something that has slept for generations." In the secluded depth of the sacred cave, Chief Níłch'į prepared for communion with the spirit world. Such seeking was not undertaken lightly, especially in times of danger, but guidance was needed beyond what mortal wisdom could provide. The alpha wolf rested nearby, its golden eyes reflecting the small sacred fire that burned between them. Its injured leg had healed with remarkable speed, now bearing only a pink scar where the trap had torn flesh days earlier. "We have delayed Hayes as planned," the chief said, as he arranged items from his medicine pouch in precise patterns around the fire. "By now, my people should be moving toward the hidden valley, away from Williams and his soldiers. But what comes next requires deeper knowing." From the pouch, he withdrew his most sacred possession, a pipe carved from red stone quarried from lands far to the north, traded through many hands before reaching his grandfather's grandfather. The bowl depicted a wolf and human standing side by side, facing a common threat. "This pipe has not been smoked in my lifetime," Níłch'į explained, as he packed it with a mixture of tobacco and sacred herbs. "It was reserved for times when the ancient alliance needed renewal." The wolf watched with focused attention as the chief completed his preparations. When everything was arranged to his satisfaction, Níłch'į began to sing a low rhythmic chant that seemed to vibrate the very air within the cave. To his surprise, the wolf joined him, its howl modulating to complement the human voice in perfect harmony. Together, their voices created an acoustic phenomenon that transformed the cave into a natural resonance chamber. Sound waves bounced and amplified, creating overtones that existed in the space between notes neither human nor wolf, but something transcendent. Níłch'į lit the pipe, offering the first smoke to the 6 sacred directions: east, south, west, north, above, and below. With each offering, he spoke traditional words of respect and invitation to the corresponding spirit guardians. Then he drew deeply, holding the smoke in his lungs before releasing it. In a thin stream toward the cave ceiling, the world around him began to shift. The stone walls seemed to breathe, ancient pictographs flowing like water across their surface. The fire's flames took shapes: deer leaping, eagles soaring, wolves running. The alpha wolf across from him appeared to grow larger, its form shimmering. Between animal and something more. "I am here," Níłch'į announced to the spirits, his voice echoing strangely in the transformed space. "I seek guidance for the protection of my people and the renewal of ancient bonds." The smoke from the pipe gathered into a swirling column above the fire, then expanded to fill the entire cave with a luminous fog. Within this mist, images formed, not mere visions, but experiences so vivid the chief could feel smell and touch. Them. He stood on a mountainside in a time long past. Before him, early Apache hunters prepared for a communal hunt, painting their faces with sacred symbols. Beside each hunter stood a wolf, not as captive or pet, but as equal partner. Human and wolf communicated through a complex language of gestures, sounds, and mental images, a shared consciousness now lost to time. The scene shifted. He witnessed the first breaking of the bondmen, with pale skin and metal weapons arriving, bringing disease, conflict, and a worldview that separated humans from other beings. He felt the pain of that separation as something physically tearing within his chest. Next came glimpses of possible futures, one dark and diminished. Where? The last Apache lived on display in white men's cities, their language and ways preserved only in museums. Another where wolf and human alike were reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, surviving but diminished, their ancient connection completely forgotten. But a third path also revealed itself difficult and demanding sacrifice, yet offering renewal. In this vision, he saw the alpha wolf clearly for what it truly was, not merely an animal, but a messenger between worlds, a being of both physical and spirit realms sent to reawaken what had been forgotten. "You are Meheono," Níłch'į whispered, using the ancient name for the wolf spirit who had taught the first Apache to hunt. "You have returned as the stories promised." The wolf's form seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement, its eyes reflecting. Wisdom accumulated across countless generations. The vision continued, showing Níłch'į specific actions needed in the coming confrontation, not just to save himself or delay Hayes, but to fundamentally shift the relationship between his people and the encroaching white world. He saw that bloodshed would only feed the cycle of violence, but there were other forms of power that even Hayes might be forced to recognize. Most critically, he saw 2 feathers standing at a crossroads, his choices pivotal to everything that would follow. The young scout carried wounds of spirit that had driven him to the white man's side, yet his heart remained Apache. His return to traditional ways would not come through shame or force, but through witnessing the old power firsthand. As the vision began to fade, one final image appeared, the ancient pictographs in the cave regenerating, their colors becoming vivid once more as new images joined the old, telling the story of what was happening now. The circle was closing. What had been separated was rejoining. The smoke dissipated, and Níłch'į found himself back in the physical cave, the sacred fire burned down to embers. Across from him, the alpha wolf Meheono waited patiently, its eyes knowing. "I understand now," the chief said softly. "Not just what we must do, but why. The renewal is not just for my people or yours, but for all the broken circles of this world." Before dawn tinged the eastern sky, Chief Níłch'į emerged from the sacred cave, his movements purposeful and precise. The vision had provided, Clarity, not just about tactics for the coming day, but about the larger purpose behind this unexpected reunion of wolf and man. Mahayano, the alpha wolf, padded silently beside him. Around them, the pack gathered 23 wolves now visible, with others presumably still watching Hayes' camp. Their coordinated movements suggested a single consciousness directing multiple bodies. We must lead them to the sacred canyon. Níłch'į explained, knowing the wolf spirit understood his words. Not by force, but by offering a trail even 2 feathers cannot resist following. From his neck, the chief removed his medicine pouch and ceremonial headband adorned with 2 eagle feathers, items instantly recognizable to any Apache as markers of spiritual authority. These he placed carefully on a flat rock near the cave. Entrance. The first sign, he said, stepping back to assess the arrangement. Now for the trail they cannot ignore. Working quickly the pre-dawn light, Níłch'į created a series of deliberate tracks leading away from the cave footprints pressed deeply into the snow, broken twigs, disturbed stones. To Hayes' untrained eye, these would appear as signs of hasty departure, but 2 feathers would recognize them as intentionally obvious. Mahayano watched the chief's methodical work, then approached a smooth patch of snow. With deliberate movements, the wolf dragged its paw through the white surface, creating marks that eerily resembled Apache symbols for follow, an important place. Níłch'į paused, startled by this display of knowledge. You remember our written language as well? The wolf's golden eyes held ancient wisdom as it continued marking the snow with symbols no ordinary animal should comprehend. For a moment, the chief glimpsed the true nature of his companion, not merely a wolf, but a consciousness that had witnessed the long history of both their peoples. Together then, Níłch'į agreed, adding his own markings to complement the wolf's. By sunrise, they had created an intricate trail leading from the cave toward the sacred canyon, a path designed to be followed, with apparent signs of weakness and urgency that would embolden Hayes while containing hidden meanings 2 feathers couldn't ignore. 4 younger wolves approached, responding to an unheard command from Mahayano. The chief recognized them as the swiftest members of the pack, their lean bodies built for speed rather than power. You understand what must be done. Níłch'į addressed them directly, removing items from his possessions, scraps of cloth, strands of hair, small personal objects carrying his scent. These he distributed among the 4 wolves. Separate trails, all eventually leading to the canyon, but taking different paths to divide their attention. The wolves accepted the items carefully in their mouths, then departed in different directions, each laying a false trail that would fragment Hayes' already diminished force if he attempted to follow all of them. Next, the chief turned to 3 of the oldest and wisest-looking wolves in the pack. You will guide our people to the hidden valley, he instructed, removing a small bundle wrapped in deerskin from his remaining possessions. It contained earth from sacred Apache grounds and herbs, with a distinctive scent Tazunk would recognize. Find the one who leads them, he told the wolves, allowing them to memorize the scent. Show them the safest path away from Williams and his soldiers. The 3 wolves acknowledged their mission with solemn attention, then melted into the forest, heading southeast toward the escaping Apache band. Now, Níłch'į said to Mahayano and the remaining wolves, we prepare the canyon itself. They traveled swiftly through the awakening forest, moving with the silent efficiency of hunters who had evolved in these mountains across countless generations. Though the chief was in his 7th decade, the vision quest had filled him with renewed vigor, his movements sure and purposeful. The sacred canyon lay 2 miles north, a natural fortress of stone with a single narrow entrance, widening into a bowl-shaped interior where ancient pictographs covered the walls. These images, created by ancestors beyond counting, documented the original covenant between humans and wolves, when both species recognized their shared spirit and purpose. as they approached the canyon entrance. Níłch'į paused to listen. From the south came the faint notes of a cavalry bugle haze breaking camp, preparing to resume his pursuit. "They follow already," the chief observed. "Two Feathers has found our sign." Mahayano growled softly, golden eyes fixed on the horizon where thin wisps of the soldiers' campfire smoke still rose. "Yes," Níłch'į agreed, as though the wolf had spoken aloud. "The young scout reads truth between the lines I have drawn. He knows this is no ordinary chase." He studied his lupine companion. "You know him, don't you? You have watched him struggle between two worlds." The wolf's expression seemed to soften, conveying both affirmation and something akin to compassion. "Two Feathers must choose his own path," the chief said as they continued toward the canyon. "We can only ensure he sees clearly what both paths offer." Behind them, they left the chief's distinctive headband prominently displayed on a rock beside the trail, the final confirmation that would draw Hayes inexorably toward the confrontation Níłch'į he now sought. Lieutenant Hayes halted at the narrow entrance to the canyon, his remaining men clustered behind him. The morning's pursuit had proven frustrating trails appearing and disappearing, splitting and converging again, all with the tantalizing evidence of the chief's recent passage. "This is it," Two Feathers said quietly, examining the distinctive headband they had discovered minutes earlier. "Grandfather has led us here deliberately." "Then we finally have him cornered," Hayes declared with satisfaction. He surveyed the canyon's imposing walls. "No way out except through us." Two Feathers shook his head slowly. "This is TZBDNE Sacred Canyon. It is ... He hesitated, searching for words the white man might understand. "It is holy place for my people. Very old, very powerful." Hayes regarded the scout with thinly veiled impatience. "Your superstitions don't concern me. We have a job to do." He turned to his men. "Jenkins, Cooper, secure the entrance. No one leaves. The rest of you, with me. Rifles ready, but hold fire unless I command it. I want the old man alive if possible." As they advanced into the canyon, even the most hardened soldiers fell silent. The natural architecture inspired involuntary awe-soaring walls of striated, red stone carved by millennia of wind and water into formations resembling cathedral spires. The morning sun penetrated the narrow space at precise angles, illuminating sections of the walls where generations of Apache artists had left their mark. "Mother of God," Sergeant Collins whispered, crossing himself as he gazed at the ancient pictographs. "How old are these?" "Older than oldest stories," Two Feathers replied, his voice hushed with reverence. "Made when animals still spoke to people. When Wolf Nation and Apache Nation were one family." The pictographs covered nearly every reachable surface of the canyon walls, hunting scenes, spiritual ceremonies, astronomical observations. But most numerous were depictions of wolves and humans engaged in shared activities, hunting together, sharing food, defending territory side by side. In one massive panel that dominated the canyon's central wall, an elaborate scene showed a circle of wolves surrounding a group of humans, both facing outward toward a common threat. The artistry was sophisticated beyond what most white men associated with primitive peoples, using natural pigments that had withstood centuries of exposure. "Sergeant, deploy the men in standard search pattern," Hayes ordered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the hushed space. "The old man is here somewhere?" As the soldiers spread out, Two Feathers remained rooted in place, his attention captured by something on the canyon wall. "Lieutenant," he called, his voice strained. "You should see this." Hayes approached reluctantly. "What now?" "This pictograph." Two Feathers pointed to a section of the wall. "It is new." The lieutenant squinted at the indicated image. Unlike the ancient paintings surrounding it, this pictograph showed clear, vibrant colors that hadn't yet been muted by time, a scene depicting soldiers in recognizable cavalry uniforms, their horses rearing in fear as wolves surrounded them. At the edge of the scene stood an elderly Apache figure with a wolf at his side. "Impossible," Hayes muttered. "We've been tracking the old man. When would he have had time to—" A wolf's howl cut through the canyon, the sound amplified and transformed by the natural acoustics into something that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. The soldiers instinctively formed a defensive circle, rifles pointed outward. "There!" Private Cooper shouted, indicating a high ledge where a massive wolf stood silhouetted against the sky. Its unusual markings and extraordinary size identified it immediately as no ordinary animal. "Hold your fire," Hayes commanded, raising his field glasses. As he focused on the wolf, he noticed movement behind it, the distinctive figure of an elderly Apache emerging from a crevice in the rock face. Chief Níłch'į stood tall despite his years, adorned with minimal ceremonial items, just a single eagle feather and simple deerskin clothing. His dignity and calm presence commanded attention without effort. "So there you are," Hayes called up to him. "You've led us quite a chase, old man." The chief made no immediate reply. Instead, he raised his hand in a gesture that triggered an astonishing response from ledges, crevices, and shadows throughout the canyon. Wolves appeared. Not the 5 or 6 Hayes had assumed were following them, but dozens, arranged in strategic positions that effectively surrounded the soldiers. Two Feathers inhaled sharply. "The old stories are true," he whispered. "The wolf spirit has returned." "It's just a trained pack," Hayes insisted, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "A clever trick to frighten superstitious men." The chief finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the canyon's perfect acoustics. "Lieutenant Hayes, you have entered sacred ground uninvited, pursuing a man who has committed no crime, except remembering what your people wish forgotten. Have orders to bring you in for questioning," Hayes replied, struggling to maintain authority despite the increasingly unsettling situation. "Surrender peacefully, and no harm will come to you." A sound echoed through the canyon, not quite laughter, not quite a wolf's bark, but something between. The alpha wolf beside Níłch'į had made the sound, its intelligent eyes fixed directly on Hayes with disconcerting awareness. "Look around you, Lieutenant," the chief gestured to the ancient pictographs. "You stand within a history older than your nation can comprehend. These walls tell of a time when my people and the wolf people shared this land as brothers. What you witnessed today is not my doing alone, but the awakening of a covenant your kind thought was merely legend." Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Every soldier sensed it. They were not facing a lone old man, but something their training had never prepared them to confront. Tense silence filled the canyon as Lieutenant Hayes and Chief Níłch'į regarded each other across the vertical distance. The soldiers maintained their defensive circle, rifles trained on the wolves that had materialized throughout the enclosed space. No one fired. The sheer unnaturalness of the situation had introduced an element of uncertainty that stayed even the most trigger-happy hands. "Your theatrics are impressive," Hayes finally called up to the chief, striving for a tone of dismissive authority. "But this changes nothing. I have orders to bring you in." "Signed by Agent Blackwood," Níłch'į replied calmly. "Authorization to question a suspected instigator of unrest." "I know what your papers say, Lieutenant." Hayes blinked in surprise. "How could you possibly?" "Because I can read, Lieutenant," the chief interrupted, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "I can read English, Spanish, and 3 Indian languages. I can also read between the lines of your orders." With deliberate movements, Níłch'į began descending a narrow path from the ledge, the alpha wolf keeping pace beside him. As they reached the canyon floor, several soldiers raised their rifles instinctively. "Hold your fire," Hayes commanded sharply, recognizing the dangerous instability of the situation. One shot could trigger a chaos from which few might emerge alive. The chief approached until he stood 30 paces from Hayes, close enough for conversation, but maintaining a safe distance. The alpha wolf remained at his side, golden eyes surveying the soldiers with unnerving intelligence. "Your true orders, Níłch'į," he said quietly, "are to remove me permanently from the reservation. Whether by arrest or bullet matters little to Agent Blackwood." "You speak treason, old man," Hayes retorted, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "I speak truth," the chief countered, "as does this." From within his simple buckskin shirt, he withdrew a folded paper and held it up. "The second page of your orders, the page you keep separate from what you showed your men." Several soldiers exchanged glances. Hayes' face hardened. "Whatever forgery you've created, it is dated January 18th, signed by Blackwood and countersigned by Captain Williams," Níłch'į continued relentlessly. "It authorizes you to use necessary force if I resist in any way, and to ensure I never return to spread seditious ideas among the agency Indians." Hayes' expression confirmed the accuracy of the chief's words. "How did you get that document?" Two feathers stepped forward, realization dawning. The missing soldier Williams. "He found grandfather first." Níłch'į nodded. "He did. Separated from your group, frightened, surrounded by wolves. He was quite willing to share what he knew in exchange for safe passage back toward the fort." "Where is he now?" Hayes demanded. "On his way to safety, with an escort to ensure he reaches it," the chief replied. "Unlike you, Lieutenant, I do not solve problems by eliminating those who create them." Hayes' hand moved subtly toward his sidearm. "Clever manipulations, old man, but they change nothing. My mission stands, does it?" Níłch'į gestured toward the wolves positioned throughout the canyon. "You are surrounded, outnumbered. Your men are tired, frightened, and increasingly uncertain of their purpose here. Is this mission worth their lives?" "They're just wolves," Hayes insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Animals that can be shot." "Perhaps," the chief acknowledged. "But before you order that first shot, consider this. While you have been pursuing me, Captain Williams prepares to move against my people on the reservation. That was the true plan, was it not? You eliminate me while Williams uses the excuse of searching for dangerous contraband to break resistance once and for all." Hayes' silence was confirmation enough. "But my people are no longer there, Níłch'į," he continued. "They departed during the night, guided by those you would dismiss as just animals. By now, they travel to places your cavalry cannot follow without Apache scouts. And your scouts," he glanced meaningfully at Two Feathers, "may find their loyalties tested by what they witness here today." A low growl rumbled through the canyon as wolves shifted position, somehow managing to compress the circle around the soldiers without actually advancing. The alpha wolf beside Níłch'ĩ remained perfectly still, its golden eyes fixed on Hayes with an intensity that seemed to pierce through pretense. "What do you want?" Hayes finally asked, the question emerging as much from tactical necessity as genuine curiosity. "What I have always wanted," Níłch'ĩ answered. "For my people to live with dignity, preserving what is sacred while adapting to what must change. I do not fight progress, Lieutenant. I fight only the destruction of wisdom that took thousands of years to accumulate." He gestured toward the pictographs surrounding them. "These walls tell of a time when balance existed, when different nations of creation recognized their connections rather than only their separations. The Wolf people remember this time. My people remember. Perhaps it is time for your people to remember as well." Hayes scoffed, though the sound held more defensiveness than conviction. "You expect me to return to the fort with stories of magical wolves and ancient covenants? I'd be laughed out of the service." "No," the chief said simply. "I expect you to return with the truth of what you've seen, that the Apache are not mindless savages to be civilized at gunpoint, but people with knowledge and traditions worthy of respect." The alpha wolf suddenly stepped forward, causing several soldiers to raise their rifles again. Hayes tensed, but Níłch'į made a subtle gesture that kept the situation from igniting. "He wishes to show you something," the chief explained. "A choice lies before you, Lieutenant. One path leads to bloodshed neither of us desires. The other—" He left the alternative unspoken as the wolf continued its deliberate approach toward Hayes. The alpha wolf approached Lieutenant Hayes with measured steps, golden eyes never leaving the soldier's face. Every man in the patrol tensed, fingers hovering near triggers. The wolf's size became more apparent as it drew closer, standing nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, its massive frame suggesting power, restrained rather than threatened. "Sir?" Sergeant Collins questioned nervously, seeking permission to fire. Hayes raised a hand, signaling restraint. Something in the animal's deliberate approach suggested purpose beyond aggression. When it stopped 6 feet from him, he noticed details invisible from a distance, the unusual silver markings around. Its eyes creating an almost mask-like pattern, the intelligence in its gaze that seemed impossible for a mere beast, the subtle scarring along its flank that spoke of previous encounters with humans. "What does it want?" Hayes asked, addressing Níłch'į without taking his eyes off the wolf. "To show you truth," the chief replied simply. Two Feathers suddenly stepped forward, placing himself between Hayes and the wolf. "Lieutenant," he said urgently, "this is Mahéono, the wolf spirit from our oldest stories. To harm him would bring disaster." Hayes scoffed. "More superstitious. Look at his markings." Two Feathers interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even himself. The silver mask, the star pattern on his chest. These are signs told in stories passed down since before the Spanish came. This is why the pack follows him, why they act with such purpose. The lieutenant studied the scout's face, seeing genuine belief rather than calculation. Even more telling was the change in Two Feathers' demeanor, the young man who had been subdued and deferential throughout their mission now stood tall, reconnecting with something long suppressed. "You actually believe this?" Hayes said quietly. "I know it," Two Feathers responded. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed the badge that marked him as an army scout and let it fall to the canyon floor. "As I know, I can no longer stand with those who would destroy my people's spirit to save their bodies." The moment hung suspended in the canyon's hushed atmosphere. Hayes' hand moved toward his sidearm, then stopped as the implications became clear. Shooting Two Feathers would instantly trigger the confrontation they were precariously avoiding. "You're committing treason," Hayes warned, though his tone lacked conviction. "I am remembering who I am," Two Feathers countered. He turned to face Chief Níłch'į, dropping to one knee in a gesture of profound respect. "Grandfather, I have walked a twisted path. I believed working with the white man's army would protect our people better than resistance. I was wrong." Níłch'į's weathered face softened. "There is no single right path, sister's son. You followed your heart's guidance. And now my heart guides me back." Two Feathers rose, moving to stand beside the chief. "Lieutenant Hayes, I formally withdraw my service as scout. I return to my people." Hayes' face hardened with the realization that his mission was unraveling. With Two Feathers' defection, he had lost not only his guide, but also his translator and cultural interpreter. More critically, the narrative he could present to his superiors was shifting unfavorably. "This changes nothing," he declared, reaching a decision. "Men, prepare to take the old man into custody. If these wolves attack, shoot them." "Lieutenant," Sergeant Collins protested, "we're surrounded and outnumbered. This isn't a winnable situation." "I gave an order, Sergeant," Hayes snapped, drawing his sidearm and aiming it directly at Níłch'ĩ. "If the old man truly cares for his people, he won't let his pets attack. His words cut off abruptly as the alpha wolf Mahéono moved with blinding speed. not toward Hayes, but toward his extended arm. Before the lieutenant could react, powerful jaws closed around his wrist, applying pressure that was precise and controlled enough to prevent firing without breaking skin. "Don't shoot." Two Feathers shouted as several soldiers raised their rifles. He could crush the lieutenant's arm, but chooses not to. He demonstrates restraint, not threat. Indeed, Hayes found himself in the extraordinary position of having his gun arm immobilized by an animal that was clearly capable of severing it entirely, yet was exercising calculated restraint. The wolf's eyes held his in a gaze that conveyed, not savagery but challenge, a demand for recognition. After a tense moment, the wolf released him and stepped back. Hayes lowered his arm, finding no marks on his skin despite the pressure he had felt. "What just happened?" he asked quietly, holstering his weapon more from confusion than decision. "You were offered a choice," Níłch'į explained. "He could have taken your hand, but took only your weapon's aim." The wolf spirit demonstrates the difference between having power and using it unwisely. Throughout the canyon, the wolves maintained their positions, neither advancing nor retreating. The soldiers remained in their defensive circle, awaiting orders that Hayes seemed increasingly uncertain about giving. "Your mission has failed, Lieutenant," the chief continued gently, "not because you were defeated, but because it was built on false understanding. You were sent to capture or kill a dangerous renegade inciting violence. Instead, you found an old man teaching his people to remember their heritage while finding their place in a changing world." Hayes looked around the canyon at the ancient pictographs telling stories of cooperation between species, at the wolves positioned with evident intelligence throughout the space, at Two Feathers standing tall with newfound certainty, and finally, at the extraordinary animal that had just demonstrated both power and restraint. "What happens now?" he asked, the question directed as much to himself as to Níłch'į. "Come with me, Lieutenant," Chief Níłch'į said, his voice gentle but carrying undeniable authority. "There is something you should witness before you decide our future." Hayes hesitated, military training warring with the extraordinary situation he found himself in. Finally, he nodded. Sergeant Collins maintained position with the men. "No one fires unless I give the command." The chief led Hayes toward a narrow passage in the canyon wall, Mahiono padding silently beside them. Two Feathers followed a respectful distance behind. The passage climbed steeply, switchbacking up the canyon wall, until they emerged on a high overlook that commanded a view of the surrounding territory. "Look there," Níłch'į directed, pointing southeast toward a distant valley. "What do?" "You see?" Hayes squinted against the midday sun, then reached for his field glasses. Through the magnified lenses, he could make out a line of people moving through a concealed mountain pass, men, women, and children, traveling in organized groups. Most remarkably, dark shapes moved alongside them, wolves pacing the column, clearly acting as guides and sentinels. "Your people," Hayes acknowledged. "Evacuating, as you said. Now look there." The chief pointed in the opposite direction. Toward the reservation. Hayes shifted his glasses and saw a dust cloud marking the approach of cavalry, at least a company's strength, with supply wagons following. Captain Williams' force, moving out as planned once Hayes hadn't returned on schedule. "They will find an empty settlement," Níłch'į observed. "No resistance, no conflict, no justification for the violence some of your officers desire. Where will your people go?" Hayes asked, lowering the glasses. "To places remembered, but not recorded on your maps," the chief replied. "Places where we can maintain our ways while adapting to the new world. Not hiding, Lieutenant, but not surrendering our spirit either." Hayes was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. His mission parameters had presumed a scenario that no longer existed, capturing a dangerous agitator from among a confined population. Instead, He faced an exodus already in progress, guided by an alliance he could barely comprehend. "If I report what I've seen truthfully," he finally said, "I'll be dismissed as insane or incompetent." "Perhaps," Níłch'į acknowledged, "or perhaps you will be the first of your kind to truly see us as we are, not as you wish us to be." They descended back to the canyon floor, where the soldiers waited in tense formation. Hayes surveyed, his men tired, confused, frightened by circumstances that defied their understanding of the natural order. A confrontation would likely end with casualties on both sides, and for what purpose? The primary objective: preventing Apache resistance had been rendered moot by the tribe's departure. Hayes turned to Sergeant Collins. "Prepare the men to withdraw. We're returning to the fort." "Sir?" Collins questioned, clearly surprised. "What about the Indian?" Our orders presumed conditions that no longer exist," Hayes interrupted firmly. "The reservation Apache have relocated themselves. There's no one left to pacify or arrest." "But, sir, the old man is clearly not the threat he was described as," Hayes finished. "No shots fired, no resistance offered despite having every advantage." He gestured at the wolves still positioned throughout the canyon. "We've been outmaneuvered, Sergeant, not by violence, but by something ... else." As the soldiers cautiously prepared to depart, Hayes approached Níłch'į one final time. The ceremonial peace pipe had appeared in the chief's hands, the same sacred object used in his vision quest, its bowl carved with the image of wolf and human standing together. "This was made by my ancestors to commemorate the first covenant between our peoples and the Wolf Nation," the chief explained. "I offer it now as witness to what has transpired here." Hayes hesitated, then accepted the pipe with appropriate solemnity. "What am I to tell my superiors?" "The truth," Níłch'į suggested, "that you tracked an old man through difficult terrain, discovered the reservation people had relocated themselves peacefully, and determined that further pursuit would waste military resources for no strategic gain." "And the wolves?" Hayes asked wryly. "The ... partnership I've witnessed?" A rare smile creased the chief's weathered face. "Tell them the territory is unsuitable for settlement. Too many wolves. Dangerous country." Hayes actually laughed a short, surprised sound. "That much is certainly true." He studied the pipe in his hands. "This is museum quality, worth a small fortune to collectors." "It is beyond price," Níłch'į corrected gently. "Not for its materials, but for the covenant it represents. Keep it, Lieutenant. Perhaps one day, when others are ready to understand, you will share what you have witnessed here." As Hayes rejoined his men at the canyon entrance, Two Feathers approached him one last time. "The reservation records will show I died on this mission," the former scout said quietly. "It would be best for all if your report confirmed this." Hayes nodded slowly. "Killed in a hunting accident. Regrettable, but not uncommon in these mountains." "Thank you," Two Feathers said simply. The patrol departed in single file, leaving the sacred canyon as they had found it, peaceful, ancient, and filled with power they had sensed but could not fully comprehend. Behind them, wolves melted into the landscape, their purpose fulfilled for now. Months later, as spring transformed the mountains, a small Apache settlement thrived in a hidden valley beyond the cavalry's regular patrol routes. Children gathered around the evening fire as Chief Níłch'į, seated with a massive wolf at his side, continued the education Hayes had once labeled sedition. The wolf spirit returned as was promised, he told the wide-eyed youngsters, to remind us that old wisdom and new ways can walk the same path. On the canyon wall, where their ancestors had recorded the first covenant, a new pictograph had been added: cavalry soldiers departing while wolves and humans stood together in the ancient alliance, renewed for the challenges of a changing world. Beside it, barely visible unless one knew to look, was the paw print of Mahayano, not pressed into paint, but somehow burned into the very stone itself, a permanent marker of promises kept and connections remembered. Blood stained the snow crimson as Chief Níłch'į knelt beside the trapped wolf. The beast's yellow eyes, once fierce, now pleaded silently as its mangled leg caught between iron jaws. Despite the biting cold numbing his fingers, the chief worked methodically, leveraging his hunting knife against the rusted mechanism. Enemy scouts lurked beyond the ridge, but the ancient ways demanded respect for all creatures. When the trap finally surrendered with a metallic groan, the wolf remained motionless, studying the human with unnatural calm. Instead of retreating, it pressed its massive head against the chief's weathered hand. What happened next defied all the chief's 60 winters of experience with these feared predators. Could this single act of compassion awaken something forgotten between man and beast? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter of 1885 had been cruel to the people of the Apache. 3 moons had passed since the last significant snowmelt, and the reservation's meager rations had dwindled to almost nothing. In the central lodge, surrounded by the remaining elders, Chief Níłch'į adjusted the eagle feathers adorning his ceremonial headdress, a symbol not of vanity, but of a solemn responsibility he carried for his people's survival. Soldiers will bring no more food until the new moon, Tazunk, his young apprentice, reported, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. At 20 summers, the young man already carried himself with the quiet dignity required of a future leader. Then we must remember the old ways, the chief replied, his voice deep and measured like water flowing over ancient stones. The ancestors survived these mountains long before the white man's rations. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the weathered faces of those gathered. Outside, the wind howled with an almost human voice, a sound that had visited Níłch'į's dreams for 7 consecutive nights. "I will hunt alone," the chief announced, silencing the murmurs that had begun among the council. "Grandfather," Tazunk began, using the term of respect rather than relation, "the snow is deep and the cavalry patrols more frequently now. Allow me to accompany you." The chief studied his protege with eyes that had witnessed 60 winters of hardship and beauty. "You are needed here. The dream wolf calls to me alone." The elders exchanged knowing glances. Chief Níłch'į's visions were respected, even when not fully understood. Since boyhood, his dreams had guided the tribe through droughts, wars, and the painful transition to reservation life. That evening, as the women prepared his traveling provisions, the chief sat cross-legged before the central fire, instructing the children who gathered eagerly around him. "The hunt is not merely taking life," he explained, his gnarled hands illustrating his words in the ancient sign language. "It is an exchange. We ask permission from the spirits of the animals. We take only what is needed. We waste nothing." He looked into their young eyes, searching for understanding. This balance is what the white man's world has forgotten. A small girl, no more than 6 winters old, tugged at his sleeve. "Is it true the wolves speak to you, grandfather?" The old chief's face softened. "All creatures speak if we remember how to listen." He tapped his chest. "Not with these ears, but with this heart." Later, in the privacy of his lodge, Níłch'ĩ prepared his medicine pouch, adding sacred herbs, a small carving of his spirit animal, and stones from significant places in tribal lands. As he worked, Tazunk entered, carrying the chief's finest bow. "I had a dream also," the young man confessed. "I saw you standing with a great wolf against many enemies." The chief nodded slowly. "The old stories tell of a time when our people and the wolf people hunted together, before the great separation. Those are just children's tales," Tazunk sighed, though his voice held uncertainty. "All tailies begin in truth," the chief replied, securing his medicine pouch. "The cavalry captain, Hayes, watches our every move. He believes I encourage resistance among the young men. You teach only the old ways. To them, our very existence is resistance." The chief placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "If I do not return when the moon is full, lead the people south to the hidden valley. Remember the path I showed." "You." Tazunk nodded, the weight of potential leadership settling visibly upon him. Before dawn broke over the eastern ridges, Níłch'į departed. He carried minimal provisions pemmican, dried berries, a water skin, his hunting knife, and bow. The reservation guards, half asleep in the bitter cold, barely noted his passage. The white men believed an old Indian posed little threat wandering alone in winter. They didn't understand that for an Apache who had learned the ways of survival from childhood, the wilderness was not an adversary, but an ally. As the first rays of sunlight touched the snow-covered pines, the chief found himself drawn northward, toward the territories that had once belonged to his people. Each step carried him further from the constraints of reservation life and deeper into the freedom of the mountains. The dream Volf awaited somewhere ahead, and with it, a destiny that would reawaken an ancient pact between two hunters who had once shared the land as brothers. By midday, Chief Níłch'į had left the familiar territories behind. The leather medicine pouch thumped gently against his chest with each step, a comforting rhythm that connected him to generations past. He paused atop a windswept ridge, his weathered hand shielding eyes that could still spot a hawk's shadow from impossible distances. The vastness before him, white-cloaked mountains giving way to valleys cut by frozen streams, had once all belonged to the Apache. Now, like his people, he was merely a visitor in ancestral lands. The old man knelt, brushing away snow to touch the earth beneath. "I am here," he whispered in the language of his fathers. "Guide my steps." In his younger days, Níłch'į had been counted among the fiercest of Apache warriors. He had ridden with Geronimo before the surrender, had watched as the world of his ancestors collapsed under the relentless advance of blue-coated soldiers and iron horses that breathed smoke. Now, his greatest battle was ensuring his people remembered who they were while finding a way to survive in this new world. The chief moved with a silent efficiency learned through decades of hunting. Despite his age, he maintained the ghost-like passage that had earned Apache warriors their fearsome reputation. His moccasins left impressions so slight they might be mistaken for those of a passing deer. When he stopped to rest, he did so under tree cover, his back protected, his senses alert to the languages of forest and sky. By late afternoon, he found fresh deer tracks, but something in his dream-guided intuition urged him onward rather than following the potential meal. "The hunt that calls me is not for meat alone," he murmured to himself. As the sun began its descent behind western peaks, Níłch'ĩ discovered the first signs of intrusion, freshly cut tree stumps bearing the unmistakable marks of white men's saws. Further on, a line of traps had been set along what had once been a game trail-cruel iron-jawed devices, designed not for quick kills, but for holding animals until trappers returned. The chief's face darkened at the sight. Such methods violated the sacred balance between hunter and hunted. They take without asking, kill without need, waste what they do not immediately want, he said to the listening wind. Even in his justified anger, his voice remained calm, measured, the voice of a man who had learned that rage, like all emotions, must serve purpose rather than mastering its owner. Near one such trap, Níłch'ĩ found unusual tracks pressed into the snow, larger than coyote, but with something distinctive that separated them from ordinary wolf prints. He crouched, studying the pattern with intense concentration. These tracks showed purpose, almost deliberation in their spacing. And something else, a slight irregularity in the right hind paw, as if the animal had carried an old injury. "You are the one who calls me," he whispered, certainty filling his chest. The weather shifted with the suddenness common to mountain regions. Clouds rolled in from the north, heavy with the promise of snow. The temperature dropped as wind picked up, carrying the bitter bite of advancing storm. Níłch'į turned his attention to finding suitable shelter, recognizing the deadly threat of exposure in these conditions. Not his knowledge of the land led him to a narrow canyon, he remembered, from hunting expeditions decades earlier. Nestled within its protective walls stood a shallow cave, its entrance partially hidden by a stand of juniper. As he approached, something caught the chief's eye: ancient pictographs adorning the stone walls near the cave's mouth, nearly invisible. Beneath years of smoke stains and weathering dot in the fading light, Níłch'į traced his fingers over the faded images, human figures standing alongside what appeared to be wolves, hunting as one pack. The paintings predated even the oldest. Tribal stories, created by ancestors so distant they existed only in myth. So it was true, he murmured, a sense of confirmation settling over him. Inside the cave, the chief worked efficiently, gathering what fuel could be found for a small, nearly smokeless fire. He arranged his sleeping space with practiced precision. Back to solid stone, view of the entrance unobstructed. Outside, the storm arrived in full fury, a whiteout that erased the world beyond a few feet of the cave's mouth. As the night deepened, the chief's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion from the day's journey and labor. He arranged his remaining blanket, positioning himself between the cave entrance and the injured wolf, a guardian stance. Just before sleep claimed him. Níłch'ĩ felt something unexpected, the heavy weight of the wolf's head coming to rest upon his lap, a gesture of such vulnerable trust it momentarily stole his breath. He placed a weathered hand on the great animal's head. "Rest, brother. Tomorrow we will discover why the spirits have reunited us." Níłch'ĩ awakened to stillness. The storm had passed, leaving an unnatural quiet in its wake. A fire had burned down to glowing embers that cast just enough light to reveal the cave was empty, the wolf no longer at his side. "Brother," he called softly, rising stiffly from his sleeping position. The moon had emerged from behind dispersing clouds, sending silver light streaming through the cave entrance. In that ethereal illumination stood the wolf, its silhouette transformed by the play of light and shadow. Though its injured leg was clearly still weak, the animal stood tall, its posture alert and purposeful. The chief approached slowly, wondering if the wolf, having received aid, would now depart as nature dictated. Instead, the animal turned its golden eyes toward him in acknowledgement, before returning its gaze to the moon-washed landscape beyond the cave. "What do you see?" Níłch'ĩ asked, following the wolf's line of sight. The world outside had been remade by the storm sculpted. Drifts of pristine snow reflecting moonlight with an intensity that transformed night almost to day. Stars hung in the cloudless sky, brilliant and close enough to touch. In that crystalline air, sound would carry for miles. Without warning, the wolf raised its head and began to howl. This was unlike any wolf's call the chief had heard in his long life in the wilderness. The sound began deep in the animal's chest, a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor beneath their feet. The howl rose in pitch and complexity, developing a pattern that repeated with deliberate precision 3 ascending notes, a sustained tone, 2 descending notes, then a pause before beginning again. Níłch'ĩ felt the hairs rise on his arms and neck. This was not the spontaneous song of a wolf calling to its pack. This was something structured, intentional, a message being sent with clear purpose. The chief's mind raced back through layers of memory to a story told by his great-grandmother, one of the few who had maintained the oldest traditions. She had spoken of the messenger song, a sacred howl used in ancient times when wolves and humans still shared a common language. According to legend, this specific pattern of sounds could be heard over vast distances by both wolf and human alike, summoning all who recognized it to council. "It cannot be," he whispered. Yet the evidence stood before him, a wolf singing a song that should exist only in forgotten tales. The howl continued, its pattern unwavering, the notes hanging in the frigid air with supernatural clarity. As the wolf sang, its body seemed to gain strength, the weakness from its injury temporarily forgotten in the importance of this ritual. Níłch'į, he felt the sound penetrate his very bones, awakening something dormant in his blood, a recognition that transcended conscious thought. Without planning to do so, he found himself beginning to hum in harmony with the wolf's call, his aged voice finding the complementary tones that humans had once added to this ancient song. Together, their voices twined and echoed across the snow-covered valley, man and wolf briefly speaking the same forgotten tone. The sound seemed to gain substance in the cold air, vibrations that could almost be seen, as well as heard ripples of energy expanding outward in concentric circles. When the song reached its natural conclusion, the silence that followed seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Níłch'į and the wolf stood side by side, waiting, though for what the chief could not have said. Then, from the distance, came the response. First one voice, then another, and many wolf howls answering from multiple directions, their calls converging toward the cave in a symphonic conversation. The wolf beside Níłch'į listened intently, its ears pricked forward, its posture communicating clear satisfaction. "You have called your people," the chief said with dawning understanding. "But why?" The wolf turned to him, its intelligent eyes seeming to assess whether the human truly comprehended what was happening. Then it did something remarkable. It dipped its head in what could only be interpreted as a nod of confirmation. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through Níłch'į's body. The boundary between legend and reality had dissolved before his eyes. The old stories were not metaphors or teaching tales, but records of a truth his people had nearly forgotten. "If you have called them, they will come," he said, understanding the implications with growing wonder. "But there is purpose in this beyond reunion." The wolf turned its gaze to the southeast, precisely the direction from which Níłch'ĩ had traveled, and beyond that, where his people struggled to survive on the reservation. "There is danger," the chief said, reading the wolf's focus. "For my people? For yours?" The animal's golden eyes reflected moonlight as it looked back at him, a gaze that contained both confirmation and alliance. "Then we face it together, as in the old days," Níłch'ĩ decided, placing his hand on the wolf's broad head. "The pact is remembered." Outside, the answering howls grew closer, moving toward the cave with purposeful speed. By dawn, the chief knew he would stand in the presence of something his people had not witnessed in countless generations, a council of wolves, called by their leader to renew an alliance as old as the mountains themselves. Dawn painted the eastern sky in washes of pale gold and rose when Níłch'ĩ emerged from the cave. The injured wolf limped beside him, its strength noticeably improved after a night of rest. The chief stopped abruptly at the sight that greeted him, surrounding the cave entrance in a perfect semicircle where dozens of wolf tracks pressed into the fresh snow. Yet no wolves were visible. "They came while we slept?" he questioned, scanning the tree line. The injured wolf moved forward, stopping at the edge of the semicircle. It raised its head and issued a short, sharp bark, not a howl this time, but a clear summons. Movement rippled through the forest edge. First one, then two, then many wolves emerged from concealment, stepping into the open with deliberate, coordinated precision. Níłch'ĩ had seen wolf packs before, but never one of this size, and never behaving with such disciplined purpose. He counted 27 animals of varying ages and colorations, arranged in a formation that spoke of clear hierarchy and organization. The chief stood perfectly still, knowing that any sudden movement might be misinterpreted by creatures capable of bringing down elk and moose. Yet he sensed no aggression in their demeanor, only intense curiosity and what appeared remarkably like respect. A large black wolf with gray, threading its muzzle, stepped forward from the group. By its bearing and the deference shown by the others, Níłch'į recognized it as a high-ranking pack member, perhaps a beta or elder. It approached the injured wolf, touching noses in greeting, then turned its attention to the human. The black wolf circled Níłch'ĩ slowly, studying him. From all angles, its amber eyes assessing with disconcerting intelligence. When it completed its circuit, it did something that caused the chief's breath to catch. It lowered its front half to the ground in a posture unmistakably similar to the bow of respect Apaches used when acknowledging a respected elder. One by one, the other wolves followed suit, creating a ripple of movement through the assembled pack as they paid homage to both their injured leader and the human who had aided him. "They honor the old pact," Níłch'ĩ whispered in astonishment. Injured wolf clearly, the alpha moved to stand beside the chief, presenting a united front to the pack. A complex series of soft yips, growls, and body postures followed, communication flowing between the alpha and its pack with nuanced detail. The human could sense, but not fully comprehend, yet something in his ancestral memory recognized patterns. In their exchange, echoes of a time when his people had understood the language of wolves. He caught impressions rather than words: danger, territory, protection, alliance. When the communication concluded, the pack reorganized itself. Most moved into defensive positions around the clearing, while the black wolf and 3 younger scouts approached Níłch'ĩ and their alpha. The injured wolf bumped its head against the chief's hand, then looked pointedly at his medicine pouch. Understanding the request, Níłch'ĩ withdrew a small handful of sacred tobacco. Following ancient protocol, he offered pinches to the 6 directions, murmuring traditional prayers of alliance with each gesture. The wolves watched with focused attention, as though witnessing a ceremony they recognized. "We acknowledge the pact between your people and mine," the chief said formally. "As it was in the beginning times, may it be again. Your battles are our battles. Your trails are our trails." As he completed the ritual, one of the younger scouts suddenly stiffened, nose testing the air. The entire pack shifted alertly, heads turning southeast in perfect unison. The alpha issued a low growl, and immediately several wolves melted back into the forest in the direction of the perceived threat. Níłch'ĩ inhaled deeply, his aged senses straining to detect what had alarmed his companions. As darkness enveloped the land, Níłch'ĩ removed a small bundle from his medicine pouch, tobacco wrapped in a square of sacred cloth. This he offered to the fire with whispered prayers, watching as the smoke carried his words to the spirits. And he sat motionless, listening as the wind's howl gradually transformed into something that sounded remarkably like a wolf's lonely call. Tomorrow, he knew, their paths would cross. Dawn broke with crystal clarity after the storm. The world transformed into a blinding expanse of white. Chief Níłch'ĩ emerged from the cave, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The snow had erased all previous tracks, creating a pristine canvas upon which the day's story would be written. He stood motionless, allowing his senses to attune to the morning. The silence after a snowstorm carried its own language, a hush that spoke of both danger and possibility. Within minutes, his patience was rewarded with the discovery of fresh tracks leading northwest, the same distinctive prints he had observed the previous day, only now more pronounced, more purposeful. "You travel with urgency, brother," the chief murmured, noting the depth and spacing that indicated speed despite difficult conditions. He followed the trail with the methodical patience of an experienced hunter. The tracks led him through a dense pine forest, across a frozen stream, and finally toward a clearing that opened unexpectedly in the wilderness. As he approached the edge of the tree line, instinct made him pause. Something felt wrong in the energy of this place. The chief crouched, using a low-hanging pine branch for cover. In the center of the clearing lay a large gray wolf, its coat silvered with age, much like the chief's own hair. One of its hind legs was caught firmly in the savage grip of an iron trap, the same type he had observed along the game trails. Blood stained the snow around the animal, evidence of desperate attempts to free itself. Despite its predicament, this was no ordinary wolf. Even from a distance, Níłch'į could see distinguishing features, unusual silver-white markings around its eyes and muzzle, creating the impression of a ceremonial mask. The animal's size exceeded that of typical wolves in these mountains, its shoulders massive, its head noble and intelligent. Most striking were the wolf's eyes amber gold and watching the tree line with unnerving awareness. Not with the panicked gaze of trapped prey, but with the deliberate observation of a being that reasoned. When those eyes locked onto the chief's position, despite his careful concealment, Níłch'į felt a jolt of recognition pass through him. "You are the one from my dreams," he said softly, rising slowly to his full height. The wolf made no attempt to growl or struggle as the human approached. Instead, it watched with what could only be described as expectation. As the chief drew closer, he noted more details, a curious pattern of fur around the neck that resembled a ritual collar. His people once used to honor particularly powerful animals, and those eyes they held knowledge no ordinary beast should possess. Níłch'į's mind returned to a teaching from his childhood, words shared by his grandfather beside a night fire. "Before our people separated from the other beings, wolf taught us to hunt. We shared meals, shared trails. They spoke, and we understood. This was before the great forgetting." The chief knelt several feet from the trapped animal, showing his empty hands. "I mean you no harm, brother. I have come as my dreams directed." The wolf blinked slowly, then deliberately lowered its head, exposing its neck in a gesture of trust. That defied all natural instinct. Moving with careful deliberation, Níłch'ĩ examined the trap. The mechanism was rusted but powerful, its teeth sunk deep into the wolf's hind leg. The animal had been trapped long enough for hunger and exposure to weaken it significantly. That it lived at all spoke to extraordinary resilience. "This will cause pain before bringing relief," the chief explained, as though speaking to a human companion. From his pouch, he withdrew his hunting knife, an old blade that had taken and preserved many lives over decades of use. Using the knife as leverage, he began working against the trap's spring mechanism. The effort required all his strength, his old hands straining, knuckles whitening. The wolf remained still throughout the process, only a slight tremor in its body revealing the pain it endured. When the trap finally released with a harsh metallic groan, the wolf did not immediately flee as any wild creature should. Instead, it remained lying in the snow, its injured leg useless, its golden eyes fixed on the chief with an intelligence that transcended the divide between human and animal. Níłch'ĩ reached slowly toward the wounded leg. "I must examine what the iron teeth have done, brother." To his astonishment, the wolf shifted position, extending the injured limb toward him in a gesture impossible to misinterpret. A request for help that no wild wolf should conceive, much less express. The chief looked into those knowing eyes and understood with sudden clarity that the ancient stories were not merely legends. They were memories of a time when the boundaries between beings were less fixed, when different nations of creation spoke a common tongue. "We have much to remember," he said softly, as he began to assess the damage to the wolf's leg. The wolf's injury was severe, but not fatal. The trap's teeth had torn flesh and muscle, but had miraculously spared major tendons and bone. Still, infection was a certainty without treatment, and the animal was too weakened by hunger and cold to hunt or defend itself. "You cannot stay here," Níłch'į said, looking toward the distant smudge of gray clouds gathering on the horizon. "Another storm approaches, and those who set this trap will return." With careful movements, the chief removed his outer blanket and laid it flat on the snow. The wolf watched each motion with steady, intelligent eyes. When Níłch'į gestured to the blanket, the animal seemed to understand, dragging itself onto the fabric with painful effort. "You are heavy, brother," the chief grunted as he fashioned the blanket into a travois, "but I have carried heavier burdens." The journey back to the cave was slow and arduous. The chief used his walking stick for additional support, his old body protesting the strain of pulling the wolf's considerable weight through deep snow. By the time they reached the shelter, the sun had begun its descent, and the first snowflakes of the new storm spiraled down from leaden skies. Inside the cave, Níłch'į rekindled the previous night's fire, adding carefully hoarded fuel to create a steady, warming blaze. The wolf settled near the warmth, still watching the chief's every movement with that unsettling awareness. From his medicine pouch, the old man withdrew small packets wrapped in deerskin herbs gathered during the proper seasons, dried and preserved for healing. Each plant had been harvested with prayers and offerings, their medicinal properties enhanced by spiritual preparation. "These came from the mountainside where your ancestors and mine first formed their pact," he explained to the wolf as he worked. "The knowledge of their use was given to my people by yours, or so the stories tell." He selected yucca root, which he crushed between two stones, adding a small amount of water from his skin to create a poultice. Other herbs, echinacea, yarrow, and sage, he steeped in hot water, creating a cleansing wash for the wound. Before touching the injury, Níłch'į sang the healing song taught to him by his grandfather, who had learned it from his grandfather. Before him, the melody was ancient, its cadence mimicking the rhythm of a healthy heart. As he sang, the wolf's eyes drifted half-closed, its breathing deepening into a pattern that matched the song's tempo. "Now we begin," the chief said when the song concluded. "This will cause pain, but it brings healing." He cleansed the wound with the herbal infusion, working with gentle efficiency to remove dirt and matted fur. The wolf flinched, but made no attempt to bite or withdraw, its trust in the human seemingly absolute. When the wound was clean, Níłch'į applied the yucca poultice, binding it in place with strips torn from his own undershirt. "You have old scars, brother," he observed, noting several healed wounds beneath the wolf's thick coat. One particularly prominent scar ran along its ribs a rifle shot that had somehow failed to kill. Another marked its shoulder, the distinctive pattern of a knife wound. "You have known men before, and not kindly." With the treatment complete, Níłch'į shared his limited rations, offering the wolf strips of dried venison from his pouch. The animal accepted the food with delicate precision, eating with a restraint uncommon to starving creatures. As night enveloped the land and the storm intensified outside their shelter, man and wolf shared the fire's warmth. The chief prepared a small pipe, offering the first smoke to the 6 directions as tradition demanded. The wolf observed this ritual with apparent understanding, its golden eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "My people believe all creatures were once one people," Níłch'į said into the comfortable silence. "We could speak to each other then, share our wisdom. The deer taught us patience. The eagle taught us to see far. But it was wolf who taught us to hunt, to care for our families, to work together as one strength." He studied his unlikely companion. "Something has called us together now, after generations of separation. I do not yet understand the purpose, but I feel its importance." The storm howled outside, wind driving snow into fantastic shapes across the landscape. Inside the cave, an ancient alliance was being reforged through simple acts of compassion and trust.